Raise 1,000.
Got some like
It's a vest, right?
BDSM look to it.
It's awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah. You end up in the wrong corner of the internet. You see that.
Or the right.
Generally not
or the right
fur.
corner.
Oh, yeah, it depends what you're into.
Raise.
Marked card.
The left corner. They say it's suited for Landon.
See, I just give you a courtesy
You gave me the
chuckle,
courtesy
okay?
chuckle. I was
you don't
just
do that for me.
thinking the same thing.
You
For
pick
anybody
up
that
me.
watched Ladies Night, Ebony Kenny came out against the courtesy chuckle.
Yeah, I just can't leave someone hanging when they.
No, leave me hanging. If I don't deserve it, if I
and then
haven't
they look
earned
at
it.
you like, you get it.
But I
got
didn't
it.
do that. I'm not looking. I'm not looking. You know,
Well,
I'm a high volume, low margin kind of comic.
Check.
King 9-6 with a couple of hearts is Landon. Got 3-bet by Chrissy B pre and flops himself the nut flush draw. Chrissy with top pair is certainly not going to shed Tice with this 3K follow-up.
Call. Thank you.
Landon calls the 3,000 and now hits a pair of 8s to add a few outs.
Not a bad card for Chrissy. She picks up a gut shot.
Pretty interesting card in the turn there. Let's roll it back a bit because we have a slight disagreement, us poker guys here. I feel totally fine with Tice calling pre-flop with ace-8 of hearts when Bicknell 3-bets to this size. Jonathan, though, you don't love that so much.
I actually really prefer a fold or a 4-bet more than a call here. I don't know. It's possible that all the solvers are not going to agree with me here. I'll acknowledge this. I haven't looked yet, but playing against a player this good out of position in what is now a bloated pot. Pot now has what, 8,000 in it. We have like 50,000. We don't have great stack to pot ratio. We flop an ace. I guess we just have to hold on. We could go broke a lot. She's going to make really good decisions against us. I don't think this hand plays great.
I think it's just a good enough hand that it can be in your calling range, and I don't love the idea of 4-betting too frequently against a player like this because they're going to react well.
Of course. No, we should fold a lot too, I think.
It just feels like a hand that begs to see a flop, and it does. Here we are.
Well, he does call.
Aren't we glad we saw the flop, Jonathan?
Yes.
Look at this flop. It's a thing of beauty. It's a meadow.
It's majestic.
It's golden. It's the nut flush draw with a backdoor straight draw if you want a little extra spice on your fun. Of course, Bicknell doesn't flop as fun of a hand, but does flop a good hand.
She'll take it.
Tice checks. Bicknell bets. Not much to say here. We're expecting her to bet king high flops most of the time.
Yep.
Right? She has a king. That makes it nice. As Tice, how do you approach choosing whether or not to check raise?
I think one of the big questions we have to ask is what value hands do we have if we're check raising? Like how much value can we represent? And then we fill in some bluffs on the other side to balance it out. There's just not a lot of value we can have on this board.
It's mostly just sets of 6s and 9s, right?
I think so.
We don't expect to have too many sets of kings. We don't expect to have king 9 or 9-6.
I mean, maybe a tiny bit, but very rarely.
And meanwhile, there's tons of gut shots and flush draws available that
Yeah.
Bicknell can easily put us on and say, well, I guess you don't have it this time. I call. So it makes raising a draw a lot less of a nice proposal for us if fold equity is a big part of our goal here.
Yeah, I think so. We also have a hand that can withstand a little bit of heat, at least with the nut flush draw, right? I mean, not meaning when we put the check raise on. I don't mean that kind of heat. But I mean, like, we can get to the turn and sometimes even call a turn bet depending on the size and make it to the river.
Right, or we can get a turn card like we did,
Yes.
where if Bicknell had bet, I think we'd be obligated to call unless the bet was just an absurd size. And against Bicknell, we might have to call anyway. Against some players, maybe we could fold.
I mean, she's always going to bet like between 60 and 90% of the pot on the turn.
Yeah,
right?
you'd think so.
Pretty much always.
Of course she doesn't. Tice doesn't bet either, which seems to make plenty of sense. He could
Yeah.
easily have the best hand. He's content to see a river and see what happens.
Well, he's also out of position, so he's checking. For
Right,
her to-
of course.
yeah.
I mean, sometimes we advocate for leads in certain spots.
Yeah.
This doesn't feel like the type of card, type of scenario that you should.
Yeah, and I also like her check because, it sets up some bluff catching opportunities for her on the river or just to get value if he checks the river.
It's hard to imagine Tice having a worse king, having gotten here this way.
Yeah.
And that's what mostly we would be going for value from. We're more likely to get value from weaker hands like a 9 or pocket 10s by going for it on the river, it seems like. And we don't want to get blown off by a semi-bluff either.
Also,
so I think it makes sense to check back.
Look at this kid's hair. He's going to bluff some of the time if we check
He
it
looks
back.
like he's got bluff hair.
for sure he's got bluff hair.
You want to catch somebody with their bluff hair trying to bluff you? Do it on Nitrogen. The monthly Poker Guys tournament guarantees an overlay. Have you heard that before? It's true. It's always been true. It's gonna keep being true. It's a great deal. Use the link in our pinned tweet.
They also have sports betting and casino games. Gosh darn it. We'll see you there.
She chooses to check back, however, and running eights for Tice. Not the path that he had carved out to victory, but he'll take it. 14K in the middle, and
Check.
he's going to check it over to Chrissy, looking to induce in the event that maybe Bicknell didn't really have much, or get a value bet out of her in the event that she does. And one has to expect that she's not going to just check back with King 10 here. Sure enough, she glances down at her chips. One white and a handful of purple. Looking like an 8K-ish kind of bet.
8,500.
8,500. And we can certainly expect that Landon's going to be check raising. Dan is
Sitting with Shrek.
if he yawns and puts his arm around him, I quit. Did look like he was ready to make a move.
Raise. All in.
Oh,
Ooh. Asking for a count.
It's probably with them everywhere, so like every 10, you get a beer, which was nice.
and whether or not Chrissy knows what she wants to do at this point, which I doubt that she does, asking for the count gives her an opportunity to size Landon up just from a reactionary standpoint.
Yeah, waste.
Because you know that somebody's not snap folding, and
There's
now she
23,
gets to look
40,
at
42,
how he
44,
feels about it.
46, 47, 48, 49, 9.
And you may have noticed by now that many of these players, when they're involved in a hand, make it a point to keep their hands off the table, down in their lap.
Is that the new thing? I feel like there's a new trend every year. The
I don't know
arm
how
on the
new it
shoulder was
is.
a thing for a
Yeah,
while.
I remember that. Because it connects with so many of the combos, which
Why do I feel like you just bet
She
the river
beats.
with value? Check shove.
it certainly does feel like Landon would be more inclined to simply lead out and make sure he doesn't miss a bet
Mm-hmm.
with an 8.
I was expecting that too, since
Very-
he unblocks the king. She's very likely to have a top pair hand that she can just call, I don't know, 10K with or something. I was expecting a bet, but this check shove is really cool, especially seeing what's happening right now.
Well, what's even cooler for him is he has to know he's got the best hand at this point. And that it worked out to a T, or he just might get called for all of it. And got her to fire on his behalf, at least the 8,500.
God, do you really check shove here?
Staring intently over at Landon.
I think I'm just gonna go with my read and call, and I might hate myself.
No doubt she was staring over at his neck, looking for the pulse, trying to pick up anything that would help her come to the right decision. And Tice doing a pretty damn good job here of not giving anything away. She is leaning call.
Alright, I'm gonna go with my read.
Wow.
Nice hand.
Ugh.
I mean, geez, that got real significant. that the sizing in this pot is like, oh, just play a little 3-bet pot over here. Just going to have a little bit of fun with the 3-bet pot. And that's like, oh, I'm going to buy a Tesla. I'm just going to check raise to 50K and I'm going to get called. Okay, let's go through this. Let's start with the initial decision of Tice checking because he gets this incredible river card. This has to be overall better for him than making the nuts with a flush, right?
Yes.
Just as far as the ability to get value from Kristen Bicknell.
I strongly agree.
Should he be going for value in a different way than he did? Is it more of a better expected value just to bet right now, try to get called by a lot of the hands that Bicknell's going to check back with?
Well, to be clear, of course we should have a balanced approach and not always bet and not always check.
Sure.
I think for the most part he should be betting here, even though he chooses to check, because I would be concerned about Bicknell being able to call our check raise. Now, we see she's able to call our check raise with just a king, so maybe I'm just wrong about that. But blind to her hand and blind to all of this knowledge that she ultimately calls, I think we do better by picking the size ourselves here rather than letting her determine the size of the bet, assuming she even bets. And wanting to get called by hands that can really call us because all the draws miss, except for 7-8, I guess. But hands that are like 2 jacks, 2 10s, maybe ace 9 suited, stuff like that are just not, I don't think they're going to bet very often.
I agree that those hands aren't going to bet. The thing that you miss out on when you bet is her potential bluffs that might have gotten here this way. They might think that that's a bit of a coordinated card on the turn. Going to check back, and now that Tice has checked 3 times post flop, maybe the ace 10s of the world feel obligated to take a shot and get a small pair off of the hand. You know,
maybe.
So we miss out on that. We also, of course, miss out on this massive bet that we get in. Now, there's a lot of pieces to that. Bicknell calling is clearly key to that being successful. The thing that works for Tice, in my opinion here, is that there are not that many combos of value that Tice can reasonably have as played. Mm-hmm. As we said on the flop, at that time, his value mostly would have been sets of 6s, sets of 9s.
If he check raised the flop, yeah.
That's expanded a little bit now to 6s full, 9s full, and like 8s full of 9s. And I don't think 7-10's in there. I don't think he ever.
Oh, no. But it expands, but it also contracts because most of the time, a lot of the time when he has pocket 6s and pocket 9s, he will check raise the flop, right? At least some of the time.
Okay.
And he didn't do that.
Yes, that's fair. So that's actually more in his favor.
Yeah, exactly.
To say like, okay, the only way that I definitely get here and have a hand that can check raise is if I have an 8 in my hand, which means it has to be either 7-8 suited or ace 8 of hearts. Maybe some other 8x of hearts, but you wouldn't think there were really any out there based on the other cards on the board.
I mean, 8-10 of hearts. Now, if you're Kristen, you're thinking about that, you can eliminate that hand, of course. But yeah, 8-10 of hearts is the only other obvious one. So
that analysis is going through Kristen's head when you check raise.
Yeah.
So maybe you think based on all of that, you can actually get called on your check raise way more than you would normally get to because your combos are so few for value.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big point in favor of check raising. And as we see, we get massive value when it works out.
Oh my gosh. The amount of value is really insane here. I mean, the question we have to ask ourselves as Tice when we're picking the sizing, because really it'd be generally like probably 25K or all of it. Those are the 2 obvious sizes. I mean, of course you could do something in between. What are the chances we get folds at 49K that we don't get at 25K, right? That's really the question. And I guess we can see based on Kristen's call, there's very little difference, it would seem, in her calling range. It seems.
It does. You would think that there is a breaking point at some point. There's some number where people start folding a bit more hands.
Yeah.
Even if the principles are the same.
Mm-hmm.
But Kristen Bicknell is probably not at that point ever in a 200-400 game. So maybe Landon Tice is aware of that.
I mean, if he bets 150,000, it's different. But you know, that's not in play for lots of reasons.
Because he only has 50K back.
That is part of it.
That's part of it. Have you kind of come around on the check raise, by the way? You like this a little better than you used to?
I still lean towards the bet, but I think this check raise has a lot of merit for sure. There's a lot of good things about it. And you mean the sizing of it?
The sizing and the choice to do it instead of leading, yeah.
Oh, I think I still mostly want to bet rather than check, but I like the size of it. Yeah, I think like we polarize ourselves really strongly. And maybe she decides, as she seems to here, that like a hero is enough, and then the heroes all play the same anyway, and here we are.
Well, of course that's not true, and Kristen Bicknell, of course, doesn't think that it's true that you just hero call with all of your hands that you get here with.
Of course not. But she picked this one,
right? So
let's talk about that.
It's a bit confounding. We talked about this on our podcast at length, and we didn't really find a reason to call with this hand unless we really believe that we're supposed to call with all of our value that we bet on the river, right? Because this feels like if it's not the bottom of our value when we bet the river, it is very near it. If it's not this, it's queens or jacks, which I don't really think should be value bets. I mean, Tice could easily have a king. I mean, maybe he bets the river with that sometimes, but maybe he doesn't.
I mean, she might go for value with queens or jacks sometimes, but there's not many combos of that anyway, and, whatever.
All
really.
of this to say, she's very near the bottom of
Yeah.
her value. And the initial hit might be, oh, well, she has the 10 of hearts, so she blocks some of his bluffs. But that's not really true against a good player. A good player is probably not going to take Tice's line and turn a hand like ace 10 of hearts or jack 10 of hearts into a bluff, because those are the wrong hands to actually bluff with once you get here, even though they were easy to get here with. Now we don't block the things that we want to block, and we're just kind of randomly choosing to bluff because we missed our draw.
Yeah,
right?
generally the kinds of hands that you would think would be bluffs would be the hands like 6-7.
Right.
Right. 9-10 we said in our podcast.
Yeah.
Hands that block full houses.
Right.
That makes sense. There aren't too many other stuff. She has the 10 of hearts, which does block 10-8 of hearts exactly, and maybe that's one combo of
Right.
value that she actually blocks. Of course, he has to choose not to check raise that combo draw on the flop, but maybe.
Right.
But that's the only value of having that 10 that I can see.
Right. So ultimately, it feels like blockers don't play a factor
Yeah.
in Kristen's decision, or at least we can't find a way that they do.
Yeah.
So then it comes down to actual hand rank, and it would seem that she's low enough for this type of sizing that Tice chose when she could probably have aces, ace king, king queen, king jack. I'll play them like this at least some of the time. Like, it feels like we don't need to call with this hand.
I mean, I agree. I'm surprised she ultimately calls. My primitive brain sees this and says, well, all the draws seem to miss except for 7-8.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's a reason why we call here as Kristen. But I know she's more sophisticated than that, and is probably going to also be thinking, like we were saying, about what are the hands he's going to choose to bluff with, and they're probably not hearts, right? They probably are the 6-7s of the world, and so now that's not so great. We don't block anything like that.
No, I mean, I feel like it came down to Tice getting the perfect run out for his hand.
Yes.
And I think the interesting part is that Bicknell was already kind of thin for value when she went for 8.5K on the river, and to then call this massive check raise when you were already kind of thin. It's pretty interesting.
Right. Well, I think maybe part of it too is maybe she just doesn't think he's capable of checking 3 times, specifically on the river when he's really got a hand this good, and going for the big check raise instead of betting for value. Like, it's really hard to make that check when it goes check on the turn. Like, very few players are capable of doing that, I think.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, Bicknell makes the decision for whatever reason she found, which I'm sure was a complex one. But still, it feels like this one could have been a fold.
Yeah.
All right, here's the solver analysis done by Wesley Cannon. Again, we did not see this before doing the podcast. This is all new to us after having done our analysis. Of note, early on in the hand, Landon Tice with ace-8 of hearts check calls the flop. We thought that was the clear best decision with the ace-8 of hearts. The solver actually wants him to raise that hand about 35 to 45% of the time, which is far more than we would have thought, right, Jonathan?
Yeah, we were thinking it would be some of the time, surely, but much less than that. Probably more like, if I was guessing, 15 to 20% of the time. So maybe half what the solver thinks should be done anyway. And again, someone like Bicknell, you probably do want to be pretty close to solver perfect if you can be.
Right. Obviously, check calling is fine with the solver. Just surprised to find that many check raises. Let's skip ahead to the river here, where we first started talking about what Bicknell might value bet. We were wondering if she would value bet worse hands than a king. And the solver does want her to value bet queens, but not anything worse than that, which, makes some sense. Tice does have some jacks in his range.
I mean, he doesn't. I mean, that's okay, though, right? If I think she should be able to value bet jacks if she can value bet queens, personally. I don't know why you couldn't.
Well, then maybe you should talk to the math.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I think we can go one pip lower in real life. And I don't think practically it's a problem. Tice is almost always going to 4-bet queens pre. And if we value bet ourselves with our 6 combos of jacks and get value every other, once in a while, and get value the rest of the time, it's great. Like, he doesn't have queens that often.
Right. Fair enough. Let's get to the good stuff, the juicy stuff. Tice's check shove. Wesley put in the option to raise 3.2x instead of shoving, and the solver clearly preferred shoving over the 3.2x raise, which I think we kind of came to that conclusion, thinking she might have a bit of a binary decision with most of her hands against those sizings.
We weren't sure if she did or not, but we thought probably that was the case. We ultimately did like going for the really big sizing, but we didn't know how much she was going to modulate based on the strength of her hand. And then when she ended up calling with King 10, it felt like she wasn't modulating that much, so it meant going big was good.
Right. And then Bicknell had to ask herself the question, what are the bluffs that Tice could have?
Yeah.
What we came up with were hands like 6-7 and 9-10, full house blockers. turns out the solver has sort of agreed with us, but wanted to have an ace in the hand. Wanted ace 9 and ace 7 as the best bluffs because it blocks aces, which are a more clear call for Bicknell than some of her other hands. That makes sense to me. It seems like a bit of an oversight on our part there.
Yeah, I agree. It also blocks ace king, which is also going to be a more likely call than worse kings.
Right.
So that's a little bit better too. So yeah, that does seem to be a better play. I don't always think the solver's going to be right, just in terms of the actual situation. Solver's going to be right if it's playing against another solver, of course. But against a human, it's not always going to be right, and that's where we bring in ideas of exploiting opponents. But right here, it feels like the solver's just clearly right.
Yeah, it does. It does. And then, of course, we get to should Bicknell call or not.
Yeah.
And the solver actually says, I don't know. It like barely prefers a fold to a call. It's very close with the king 10. We thought it would be a fold, but it's just barely a fold in the solver's eyes. I guess it's a good enough hand against this line that you got to call some of the time.
The solver thinks having the 10 of hearts is actually the final factor to make the fold, where it's calling with the 10 of clubs and the 10 of diamonds. So there were no flush draws with those two anyway. There is the 10 of hearts and the 10 of spades. And so as a result, yeah, it thinks that blocking the heart draw even a little bit, you'd rather not. Even though how many times is Landon really going to show up with missed hearts here? It doesn't seem like very likely.
It doesn't, but I guess there's at least the possibility.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the solver. Thank you to Wesley Cannon.
Lot of action in that hand. So mostly the solver and us agreed, as it turns out. That's sort of cool. Do you guys agree with us? Do you agree with the solver? Do you think ultimately Tice should be going for all of it here on the river? Do you think Kristen Bicknell should be calling? I guess we thought she should fold, and the solver's like, well, I guess it's a fold. You know, as much as possible, right in the middle. Where do you guys stand on this, and why? Let us know in the comments.
Yes, and of course, if you want to hear more about this hand and other hands, check out the podcast. It's the Breakdown Poker Podcast. It's anywhere you get your podcasts. We'll see you there.